Hello again, my good friends, and welcome back to another episode of 15-Minute Free Thinking, Psychedelic Edition. I'll be your host. My name is Joshua, or Carpo if you prefer, and I suppose the Carpo nickname has its own story that will be told in time, but it does relate to cannabis use and a game we used to play called Zonk, but I kind of reclaimed the name Carpo during a very psychedelic weekend when I was out with friends, and every time I go out in public, there's somebody else named Josh. It's the weirdest thing. I never meet Joshes in my daily life until we're at some event where I'm with them for days on end, and everybody says, Josh. And we don't know who it's like. I'm going by Carpo this time. That's my nickname from Zonk, so I'm going to stick with it. Anyhow, all of this relates to the topic of conversation, which is psychedelics. Rather, psychedelic drugs. Now, I'm going to pop my disclaimer in here first. Everyone has their own opinion on these topics, especially when it comes to how to identify a psychedelic. Some people will tell you that transcendental meditation is psychedelic, and they're not incorrect. There will be people that will tell you that yoga can be psychedelic. I don't doubt that either. But I'm specifically talking about psychedelic substances that we consume, whether orally, intranasally, intravenously, or rectally for some people. I'm not going to get into the boofing aspect here, but let's just say that I'm well versed in substance use. There's two things I won't do when it comes to drugs, and one of them is putting a needle in my arm. Now, I'm not saying that under a clinical setting or proper supervision I might not try IV, ketamine, or DMT. These are topics that I guess I have to get into to explain where I'm coming from, but never recreationally. And I don't really need anything going up my butt either. So we'll just leave that off the table for now, and we're going to talk about things that you consume through your face. As funny as that sounds. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that I haven't talked about enough for a couple of reasons. One being that I have kids, and I've known people who have suffered through some serious events mentally relating to not just the drugs they consume, but being predisposed to a certain condition like schizophrenia or having a panic attacks or, having a psychotic episode, which I personally witnessed in people and had to talk somebody down. And it didn't just take an hour or a week, it took a couple of months. And I've met a couple people like this that I've seen some people have gone off the deep end and never recovered. And this is where the therapy comes in, the most important part. It's what in the psychedelic community they call integration. The integration is how you process the events that you've gone through mentally. And when I say psychedelic, I need to clarify, as I said before. First off, I'm not a doctor. None of this is health advice. This is all just a discussion. Please make your own decisions and do your own research on these topics. I've been a psychedelic advocate since about 1990. It's been, 34 years that I've been interested since the first time I was introduced to LSD. Blew the lid off of what I thought reality was, even though I was already into mystical, I didn't even realize. I have a bunch of, symbolic like tattoos for like the earth symbol and these quote spiritual symbols. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was just a dumb kid, but at the time I knew that there was something that I was called to do. And once I discovered psychedelics, I realized that that was going to be part of it and that this was going to revolutionize the world. I said, if everyone could try these substances and use them responsibly, the world could be a different place. There is something right now which I never thought would take place. I figured they would be legalized or accepted eventually. But now there's the Wild West frontier, not of illegal psychedelic drugs, because they've always been there. And they've always been available, readily available, and generally don't harm anyone. And along come all these other, heavier illicit drugs. They flood the market and they create addicts. They don't give you any depth of character or understanding. There's a huge difference between doing fentanyl and eating mushrooms, obviously. And unfortunately, Portland, legalizing everything, just went back and recriminalized all the drugs and shut down the psilocybin clinics, the mushroom shops. They don't understand the difference between something that can help people and something that will almost always hinder people. And that's not to say that painkillers don't have a place. They've done amazing things for me when I needed them. It's great substances. And unfortunately, abuse, it's not that people are stupid and they all go out and seek these things. It's that we allow big companies to, just pay $1 billion fine and still make $10 billion off of, selling us basically heroin in a pill all through the 90s. Everybody I knew took OxyContin back in the day. So, not off topic here. I don't want to get too far off track. We're here to talk about psychedelics, but I felt it needed the preamble for you to understand my history. Because with a 30-year plus history of taking psychedelics, not all the time, there was a period where I was taking them every weekend, sometimes more. But there's other times where I wouldn't take them for 2 years, 3 years. One time I took 6 hits of Felix acid, and the guy warned me not to take more than one, but I was stupid and bored and didn't think they were kicking in. My time was off, and when I ate the other 3, I took 1, then 2, then 3, like an hour apart. Huge mistake. Some of the cleanest experiences I've had took longer to hit, and I knew that psychedelics took a while to kick in. But anyway, after that I said I'm taking a long break, and I did. It was several years, and then I met my wife, and I kind of eased back into it. And right now my psychedelic experiences are maybe once a year, twice a year, maybe 3 times a year tops. That, when I say experiences, I mean things like LSD or psilocybin mushrooms, which honestly I haven't taken a big dose of mushrooms in several years. It's weird because I have taken acid because it kind of is a little more motivating when I'm out, with friends and I want to have an experience with a group. Mushrooms tend to make me isolate, and each substance is unique. But in order to complete my psychedelic repertoire, I figure I should try everything, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case. It's become fashionable to say, oh, I went on an ayahuasca journey. And you'll notice people will tell you over and over, these are how many times. You're counting how many times you've taken ayahuasca. Like 47 times. Like, okay, so why are you still taking it? Sure, you need to relearn these experiences, but not more than a couple times a year. And you're young, fool. What are you taking it every week? I mean, come on. What do you really need? Well, certain psychedelics are that way. You don't need them very often. And then through the years, I've avoided disassociatives, which I need to put in this category before I go on, because psychedelic merely means mind manifesting, okay, or mind revealing. And because of this, it can be anything that makes you see yourself outside of yourself. And I'm not talking about like just looking down or seeing yourself or having an out-of-body experience, but really seeing the depths of your soul and psyche and why you are the way you are, and being able to want to make changes for the better and not beating yourself up for things that you feel bad about. It's a very simple concept. Once you've felt it, you understand it. And anybody who is a practitioner within the new psychedelic movement should know these things and understand the feeling. In fact, I listened to a podcast earlier. I've been listening to nothing but podcasts from therapists and therapist groups relating to psychedelic research. Recently, MDMA was denied to be approved for PTSD patients and others. It was a big blow to the psychedelic community but even though MDMA itself is not considered really a traditional psychedelic, you see, it works on serotonin, and it makes you feel warm and fuzzy and good about people and feel like you can open up and talk with family and friends. In the 70s, they said it was, a year of therapy in a couple of hours. That was the psychiatrists that were using it. And then it fell this blanket emergency ban because people were using it at nightclubs. And this is the problem. The U.S. government has a long history of banning substances that have benefited people immensely. And as I was growing up, we were told psychedelics were banned because they didn't want us to think. And I was like, that's ridiculous. It was just fear mongering. But it ended up being true. The Nixon administration, as new documents have come out and been declassified, and people have discovered that these recordings in the Nixon administration office said we need to get these hippies to basically stop protesting. So we need to lock them up. So let's make drugs illegal. And that's what they did. And, it's pretty crazy to think that so many, doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists, which, by the way, have fought these things for decades, were left in the dust by horrible decisions by people who really know nothing about these substances. So, in the meanwhile, people grew their own mushrooms, or they picked them at the coast at their own peril, avoided cops and landowners. I've been out mushroom picking at the Oregon coast. We have the most potent mushrooms pretty much in the world, psilocybin mushrooms. They're called psilocybin azurescens, and they are very blue, and they're also called flying saucers. They can get pretty big, but it's hard to find big ones, but they are extremely potent. But they're also wood-loving mushrooms, so they can cause paralysis, which is mushroom lovers, or wood-loving mushrooms paralysis, which your legs can just stop working for a while, and that's scary as hell to people. And so I stick with like psilocybe cubensis. And by the way, for my birthday this weekend, we're going to rent a little cabin, and I'm going to possibly eat a couple. These, when you have the right time, just taking a couple mushrooms isn't going to incapacitate you. It's when people abuse and take too much. Now, I don't know if you can take too many mushrooms, or if you would even want to. I've taken 7 grams. I split a half ounce of golden teachers with a friend of mine, or maybe they were penis envy. I don't recall. They're both potent as hell, and it depends on how they're grown. And they were, it was a wild night in our sleeping bag under the stars, just laying in the middle of nowhere. And it was a very revealing experience for me. All that aside, I'm not here to reminisce, but I feel like this kind of leads up to my point of why I'm kind of scared of the current psychedelic space. I want to get into psychedelic therapy. And I've gone back and forth on how to have the confidence to do it. I'm not a trained psychiatrist, obviously. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not even a health practitioner of any sort, and I haven't taken any courses. Now, of course, I could go take some basic classes on, like, where they would teach me about certain mental disorders, and of course probably refer to the DSM-5, which is the diagnostics manual, which a lot of people criticize the fact that so many more mental diseases have just popped up out of the blue, and now everybody's got something. I kind of go by the approach of, you're not broken. You're fixable. Everybody's fixable. You don't have anything wrong with you. You just have things you want to change. And that's natural. Everybody does. If you think you're perfect, then, you're probably so in denial that you've probably got more issues than anybody else. Because most people, of course, realize I need to, work on bettering myself. But we tend to push it to the back of our mind. Under the influence of a psychedelic, these things come to the surface. And sometimes we deal with grief. Sometimes if a person is really unable to process things in their life, and then they take a psychedelic, they can break down and get very emotional. A person like myself who takes them often has been able to process these things and learn how to cope through integration. Integration means you take the substance and then you apply the lessons to your life. So, all this said, it's gone from being a black market where you get busted with acid and you get locked up for life in some places, to an atmosphere where in a lot of places you can just go buy psychedelics and take them at a clinic without anybody batting an eye. Now, even take home ketamine, which you can order online now. And I needed to add this in there because I didn't think disassociatives were really like psychedelics until about a year ago, over a year ago. I don't know if it was 2 years ago. I'm honestly, time has just flown. Life's crazy. But somebody introduced me to ketamine. after a Fish concert at a motel room, and I was already had taken some LSD, and it was the greatest experience of my life. I mean, it was, I say that every time. It's like, oh, this is great. But I had so much fun. Um, Over about the last year, I've done experiments, running experiments with different smells, different types of incense, different types of tones, whether it's solfeggio or binaural beats, or listening to bowls like Tibetan bowls, or techno music, a whole variety of different things under these ketamine states, these K-holes, if you will. And I've found that to be the most manageable and safe substance that I've ever come across, with basically a zero incident of negative reactions if it's done properly. If you're out doing it at a rave or something, you might have a negative experience, you might not. Most people don't, regardless of where they are, they have fun. But if you do it with headphones and a dark room, and you set your intention ahead of time, you can have an amazing experience, regardless of whether you talk to anybody about it and integrate it. And this brings me to the main focus of this podcast, which is the fact that it went from being an illegal drug that you basically had to nag your buddy to get a hold of, to being something that everybody's talking about, and doctors are acting like, well, yeah, here, come to my clinic. Some of these guys, they've done thousands of sessions with people. And so I've heard dozens of interviews with different doctors who have different protocols, whether it's MDMA, psilocybin, or ketamine most of the time. And what I've found is that there are some doctors, the one I just listened to earlier, he was saying his opinion. He said, this is just my opinion, but I don't think anybody should be a psychedelic practitioner or, assistant or provider if they haven't done at least 30 or more, say, trips. And as he said, which they've had the bliss, they've had the darkness, they've seen all these different angles to the different substances, because only if you've been there can you be a good guide to anybody else. And so we have these doctors coming in as money grabs, setting up these clinics where people can go in and do psychedelics in this sterile setting where they have no clue about set and setting. I mean, they think that means just a kind of dark room with a blindfold and a crappy bed and a couple pictures on the wall. You need to be in a comfortable zone, and that's usually at home, in my opinion. But that's hard to do. Most people are scared and they want a clinical setting. I would rather travel to people's houses and do it at their own home. Say, I'll sit with you and I'll go through the experience. The only thing I can't do is administer it. And this is where it comes down to, of course, the financial incentive. It's an anesthesia, ketamine. So some people will spend $1,000 on a ketamine treatment, give or take. And out-of-pocket expense like that isn't attainable for most people. So I've heard some doctors argue, well, it'll basically trickle down economics, but trickle down enlightenment is what they said. Well, they'll pass this knowledge on to their the rest of us. Like, come on, anybody, you've obviously not been there. I've taken hundreds of trips and different experiences, different moments, different times of day, different diets. All these things I've mentally logged, some of it written down. And the reason that I haven't talked about it more as I watch it just grow and grow is, as I said, because I have kids, but more than that, because I feel like it's more fun to just watch it unfold and just work on my own discoveries. Some of the discoveries I've had, I can't explain in words, and you just feel like a bumbling idiot. Some people label it religion. They see Jesus, they see Muhammad, whatever it is. Everybody's got their own visions that they have. I've seen them all. I've seen crosses, swastikas, you name it. I've had these weird experiences where I've seen things that I can't explain, that just come like, Arabic type numerals, but different. And or more like some kind of old, Hebrew, like really beyond, but something slightly different than Hebrew, but at the same principle, the same style of letters. It makes you wonder, like, did our ancestors, by doing psychedelics, tap into some sort of enlightened state where not they're just aware of things they already know, but are literally able to tap like a radio frequency into some sort of other realm? Now, this may sound crazy to some of you, probably will. And to others, you'll be like, not surprised at all. Like, yeah, of course, there are other realms. So the brain is designed to live in this 3D realm. It's programmed to see the way we see, to smell, to feel, to hear, touch and taste. Everything we do is controlled by that mechanism. But when you shut down, say, your frontal cortex and the rest of your brain starts to communicate, you realize you know things that you didn't know you knew. And you ask yourself, how can my daily brain be so limited in the scope of what it can accomplish, where my psychedelic brain can go elsewhere? And so in these moments, you start to question your own, not sanity, you just question your own reality. Like, am I just making this up? You see, when a lot of young people try these substances and they're not prepared to integrate it and talk to somebody, they might get a type of ego complex that comes with psychedelics. It's the Jesus complex, where you truly think you're the most powerful, the best. I've seen this happen to people. It's happened to me by like the feeling I've got, but I never fell for it. I'm like, that's just my ego talking. I'm like, what do I have to accomplish important in this world? It's just a bunch of shit talking to myself, and I laugh it off. Maybe I should take it more seriously. Maybe we are called for something, but it's different. You see, psychedelics make things seem more important than they are. And this is the downside, not the positive side. It can be good, but it will make you think, especially if you've done a lot of trips. You'll realize you'll have an idea for a slogan or, maybe a business. And then when you come down, you're like, okay, it wasn't that great of an idea. And so what I found is, I hate to say, nitrous oxide, I didn't realize was psychedelic in its own right. And somebody who told me ketamine was like nitrous, but they called it hippie heroin. They said, you shouldn't try it because you'll probably like it too much. So here's how much I resisted and how cautious I am. I bought a gram about 8 years ago, and I just put it away, and I had it ever since. I had it for like 7 years, 6 years. And everybody kept saying, you still have that? Oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, I'm still afraid to try it because I might like it. And so when I finally did try it, I ended up liking it, and I abused it a little bit. And I'm not a whole lot. I didn't get to the point where I was doing it all day, every day, although small amounts I found could be very beneficial for getting over stress or of a phone call, because I'm kind of socially awkward and anxious, believe it or not. I can make a video, but actually being personally calling a business even is just like pulling teeth for me. I don't know why. Something I need to work on, I guess. But these psychedelics make you want to take control of your life. And so this is where it comes down to, how do you do it? And if you want to have some sort of a psychedelic therapy, is it better to just hire a friend, a shaman type? Like, here's the thing. There's the shamans, right? The ones who want to help others, the ones who have done the medicine and, done it for a long time. Then there's the doctors, some of which have never even touched a psychedelic, but just see money, because there's those too. Not to say all doctors are like that, of course not. But let me say, I would never go to therapy with a doctor who he himself had not tried a psychedelic at least several times, and especially in doses that are necessary to achieve some sort of, a bigger awareness, not just some microdose go, ooh, I feel a little lightheaded, but to go into your soul, and once you've done this, you understand what I'm talking about. And those of you who have been there know, it can be an amazing experience. It can be scary. It can be gut-wrenching, but usually it's very pleasant, and done under the right conditions, I think can benefit most people. And ketamine therapy could be even easier and better, especially since it's a Schedule 4 drug, right? Not a Schedule 1. This is a huge difference. This is why they can just send it in the mail. But they send you lozenges. They also make a nasal spray, but generally you go into a clinic and they have either an IV where they do it intramuscular, intravenous, or they'll give you this new way. I can't recall what it's called, but it's like a shot. But it's much more concentrated and hits you harder. My belief is that if you want to have the full experience, you have to go deep enough to where you're not knocked out, but you're pretty damn close to it. And that's where you open your eyes and the whole room looks like a different place almost. But you don't want to open your eyes. You want to keep it closed because you can break the spell. You go into these dreamlands where you're experiencing things. And, I don't want to romanticize it, but the experience is so profound for everybody who tries it. They say it has like an 83% at this guy's clinic. It's something like a 75% rate overall of reducing suicidal ideation as well as depression. That is damn good, and that's probably minimizing. I'm sure a lot of people have great experiences. So is it harmful? No, it's not. And that's the beauty. It's been used safely for decades, on, anyone, even kids. It's an anesthetic. So if you take large enough doses, can it be damaging? They say that it can, shrink the your bladder, the walls on your bladder, and it could cause kidney problems if you take huge amounts for long term. But we're talking large amounts. And yes, some people in the party scene do take large amounts, say up to an eighth a day, or like 3 grams a day. Some people, they said that they've seen people who take a gram a day and haven't had any issues. But of course, be careful. You don't want to do it every day. It's something you want to use medically, especially, I guess in your own way, right? I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong words. I don't want to tell anybody how to use anything. I think people need to be aware of their own circumstances, shortcomings, and I would definitely recommend having a guide, somebody to sit with you, no matter what drug you're doing, especially if it's the first time. But there are times when, I go into a complete K-hole by myself and have had some weird experiences, completely isolated. It seems if you're away from people and in a quiet spot where nothing will disturb you or move you, it's like being in a float tank. You can kind of have out-of-body experience. But if you get disturbed or interrupted, it ruins the whole process. But, I never thought I would talk ketamine up as being even better to me, something that just lasts an hour or two, as opposed to something that keeps me up for 8 hours, like LSD, or psilocybin, even like 5 hours, maybe. It's hard enough for me to sleep sometimes, But those things are definitely worth, the experience. Now, there's, of course, ibogaine, which people use, which I guess isn't quite as visually psychedelic, but is great for people in recovery. And a lot of clinics are using that when they can. And then there's dimethyltryptamine. It's the weirdest one. It puts you in another dimension. It's the only way to describe it. And when you're there, it seems like everyone's aware of you and you're aware of everything. And it's one of the oddest experiences. I know DMT is produced endogenously by the brain, and they say that it's produced a lot during childbirth by the mom and when you're born, the baby and the mom. And then also when you die. And so if there's a flood of DMT when you die, perhaps that just helps you kind of adapt to a different channel, or maybe it's just a chemical that reassures you. Nobody can know why these things exist or they're used. DMT might be used in dreaming. That's what a lot of people suspect. But who knows? Psychedelics are kind of like a waking dream if you use them with your eyes closed. But a lot of people use them in a party atmosphere, and they do have a bad bad rap in certain places. But uh, at any rate, I think that anyone who wants to try these things should be cautious about who's administering them. And I think that people should be aware, not just of the consequences and risks, but also of how little you can understand as a clinician if you've never taken a psychedelic. Like, that would be the first thing I would ask if I ever went to a clinic to have psychedelic therapy, which I wouldn't because I do it myself. I prefer being my own therapist. But yeah, I would really love to see. I would love to see people have more access to these things, and I feel like the clinical setting puts the cost out of reach of the average person. And I don't think that the health industry is going to finance that or make up for it. They won't see it as important as we do. They want money. So I think what we're going to have to do is like a public funding. The people are going to have to fund each other. And those who can afford therapy, who have a good experience, if you're a wealthy person and you go out and you have ketamine therapy or psilocybin treatment and it really helps you out, I'd urge you to donate to a group, which I'm sure there's some by now, which their purpose is to provide these services for people who can't afford it. I mean, a lot of folks will just try it on their own, but some people are scared and they really do need a clinic, some lady living by herself in her 60s who's depressed, or, some guy who's afraid of death and constantly anxious but doesn't have any friends or family in the area. To be able to go to a clinic and just get one treatment, which could help you for months. And I hate to say it, but the health industry doesn't like that. They don't like a treatment that only lasts for a few hours and then helps you for months, especially when it's something that's so readily available, like ketamine or psilocybin, which anyone could grow at home. This is one of the times where the people need to stand up. There are a lot of folks just doing it on their own and saying, screw the system. I get that. Has always been a strong push to make things legal, like with MAPS. They do a lot of psychedelic research. Folks need to realize that these are sacraments. And when people start taking advantage of them, and especially trying to patent the compounds or make synthetics, it'll just complicate the market, just like legalization of cannabis. Decriminalization or legalization of psychedelic drugs is only going to lead the health industry to jump right in where they already have licenses and patents on certain, processes and whatnot. And then you'll have to go through them to get it, right? So I guess the black market will always continue to exist for that reason. I do understand the desire to have measured dose, but sometimes with things like mushrooms, you just got to eat the mushroom. Just weigh a few out and chew them up and swallow them, see what happens. Yeah, that's of course, know what kind they are. That's at least one thing. There's the whole fear of mushrooms is way overblown. There's only a few that are really deadly. Even out here, the death cap, and it's pretty distinct. It's got a big vulva on the bottom, and so many other mushrooms that might just give you a slight stomach ache, but people are scared to death of them. So picking psychedelics can be tricky, but if you pinch the stem and it turns blue, you probably got a winner. It's a good way to know. Anyhow, that's enough psychedelic talk for now. Over and out. I'm gonna go eat some lunch, and just wanted to say thanks to everybody. My dog's barking and going crazy. I don't know why, but I better go figure it out. I'm going to get way more in depth on this topic down the line, because I want to get into the specifics of how these things work as much as I possibly can, without getting all technical, because it really doesn't matter which receptors they affect. Ketamine affects the NMDA receptors, and glutamate affects glutamate, where, LSD affects the 5-HT2A receptor. MDMA works on serotonin. LSD also works on dopamine, and I'm sure MDMA has a slight effect on dopamine as well, but it's usually serotonergic or dopaminergic, one or the other. And one has to do with motivation, of course, one has to do with pleasure, and they are very tightly intertwined. Let's just put it this way.